All right, so in this chapter, we have been proving triangles congruent, and we have done that using SSS, SAS, ASA, and AAS. And remember, we only needed to show three things then to prove that the triangles are congruent. But if those triangles are congruent, that means that all three corresponding sides are congruent, and all three corresponding angles are congruent. And so what we're doing, this is going to be like the last type of proof we're doing, but we're taking it to one more step. That is, after we prove the triangles are congruent, then we can say that those corresponding parts of those triangles are congruent, and we can talk specifically about one of those corresponding parts. And that's basically what that says right here. And the reason for when we talk about the corresponding parts of congruent triangles being congruent, that is this right here. And so CPCTC is going to be our reason when we talk about those corresponding parts of congruent triangles. And you can see it stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And it's a lot easier to write CPCTC than it is to write all of that. So the proofs are going to look very similar. We are still proving triangles congruent, but then we're going to take it one more step and talk about a set of corresponding parts of those congruent triangles. So let's do this. We're going to start with writing our givens. So angle KBC congruent to angle ACB. And we have angle K congruent to angle A. And that's our given. Normally we would mark the picture, but the picture's already marked. So everything's marked on the picture. Now we go to the diagram and we say, is there anything else we can see? Remember, things that we can mark are vertical angles or reflexive sides. And in this case, we have this reflexive side right here. So we can say that BC is congruent to BC because that side is part of both triangles, and that is the reflexive property. So now I see three things marked. It looks like A, S. And so we can now say that those two triangles are congruent. Now when we do that, we don't have it written for us, so we have to be really careful. I'm going to say triangle BKC. So in other words, I did the 1 mark, 2 marks, no marks, congruent to triangle CAB. And remember, that congruent statement tells you everything. It means like B goes with C and K goes with A and so forth. So it has to be written properly. And that's AAS. Normally we would be done now, but we're not done because we want to say that this side is congruent to this side. And we can say that now. Since the triangles are congruent, we can say that KB is congruent to AC, and that's because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, CPCTC. And so all the proofs now, very similar, just one more step to talk about one of those corresponding congruent parts. All right, let's look at our next one here. We have our statements and our reasons. I'm going to write down all my givens. BA congruent to DA and CA congruent to EA given. And they're all marked on my drawing. So remember, something else we can get from drawings are vertical angles. So when we say those angles, remember, we can't just say angle A, but we're going to say angle CAB congruent to angle EAD. And that is side, what am I saying? Vertical angles congruent. I'm getting ahead of myself. Vertical angles congruent. Now I have enough to say that the triangles are congruent. So I'm going to use those same order. I'm going to triangle CAB congruent to triangle EAD, again matching up those corresponding parts. and this is side, angle, side. Notice what we need to prove is that angle C congruent to angle E, and we can say that now because the triangles are congruent, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, and we're done. Finally, one more example. Let's put this down here. Statements and reasons. My given, AB congruent to AC, and M is the midpoint of BC. So AB and AC are marked, nothing with the midpoint yet. Maybe we focus on that now. So if M is the midpoint of BC, here's the whole thing. If M is the midpoint, then it's going to cut that in half. And so it's going to make these two congruent. And so we can say BM congruent to CM. And remember, on your toolbox, it says midpoint divides segment in half. Oops. Looking at my picture, there's one more thing I can say. We have this in the middle here. AM congruent to AM, reflexive. And now I can say these two triangles are congruent. So I'm going to say triangle ABM congruent to triangle ACM. And it's by side, side, side. And then finally, we can say what we want to say. That is that angle AMB congruent to angle AMC. Another of these right here. And that is by CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So you can do it. We're just doing it one more step.